Good almost afternoon. This has been a good morning so far. I think we're broaching on some topics that are sorely needed addressing of in our industry. And before we launch into a conversation, or rather some example sharing of some best practices and some examples of leadership, I think it's important to recognize that there is a little bit of personal shame in some of our roles in this industry, and the things that we have been personally been able to take advantage of and gain benefit from, while another side of the value chain definitely hasn't. And I know my personal experience as a buyer is that it took me 10 years before I realized that some of my own practices and actions, and even the way I was remunerated based on my cost of goods achievements, was contributing directly to some of the challenges that I was confronting personally as I went to interact with my suppliers and my partnerships at origin. It's a really powerful thing to recognize, and it introduces, I think, an important vulnerability into our industry that we could all benefit from a little bit. And the other thing I want to say, and it's been brought up a couple times here this morning, is that here we are in a room, high ticket price for admission, talking about a crisis that affects, whether it's 12.5 or 25 million livelihoods around the world. Many of those people, most of those people, the giant majority of those people can't even dream of coming here. And so I think it's important to just sit with that for a second and acknowledge that we need to, as Rick and so many others have said, include other voices in this dialogue. And speaking of other voices, I'm going to kick off this panel with Réne León Gómez from PROMOCAFE. And the reason that his information was selected is PROMOCAFE hosts an event called Cumbre de la Roya in Mexico City last September. I attended, and they were presenting all kinds of socioeconomic data related to the impacts that coffee was having, the coffee prices were having on the communities in the 10 countries that PROMOCAFE represents. It occurred to me that it was strange that that information rarely made it to the specialty coffee industry audience. And so René will share with us a couple of points about PROMOCAFE generally, because it's not a very well-known organization in our industry, and then some of those socioeconomic challenges. So, René, por favor.
Muchas gracias, Chad. Buenos días a todos. Yo les voy a hablar sobre la situación que están viviendo los productores de café en nuestra región.
Yo la manejo.
En nuestra región, como hoy se mencionó en la mañana, una situación crítica, lo dijo Rick, una situación de infarto. PROMOCAFE representa 10 países de la región, desde México, todos los países centroamericanos, Panamá, Perú, República Dominicana y Jamaica. Una producción importante de café, alrededor de 34 millones de sacos, 2.3 millones de hectáreas, 5 millones de personas viven directamente del café en nuestra región, principalmente pequeños productores que están entre 2 y 3 hectáreas, y estos generan alrededor del 25% del café arábico que se consume en el mundo. Muy importante el café en nuestra región para la generación de divisas. La economía de nuestros países depende grandemente del café. En nuestra región estamos enfrentando grandes retos. Los productores están enfrentando grandes retos. Y yo pondría en primer lugar el reto económico. La producción de café a través de los años ha perdido su valor. Hoy se mencionó, los precios nominales se mantienen hace 40 años, sin embargo, el poder adquisitivo que tenía el productor ha caído grandemente a través del tiempo. Esto relacionado con la inflación, y paralelo a esto tenemos cada vez mayores demandas al productor de café. El productor de café está enfrentando de forma solo grandes demandas, el cambio climático. Vemos ahora una ausencia de una generación nueva de jóvenes interesados en producir café. Nos llama a pensar quién va a producir el café en el futuro, quién va a producir ese café de calidad que caracteriza a nuestra región. Es decir, esta crisis económica representa en términos generales para el productor cero sostenibilidad económica. Algunos ejemplos para explicar la disparidad, la inequidad que hay en la cadena del café. Hoy se mencionaba que la cadena, imaginada como eslabones, y me gusta pensar que el eslabón del productor es un eslabón muy delgadito, como un alambre oxidado ya, y tenemos esa industria tan importante dependiendo de ese eslabón tan delgado. Algunos ejemplos, podemos ver aquí que el gobierno de un país importador, en este caso Estados Unidos, recibió una cifra superior producto de los impuestos que se pagaron relacionados con la industria del café en Estados Unidos, superior al valor que recibieron los 25 millones de productores en el mundo. Solo en un país importador se generó producto de impuestos un valor mayor que lo que recibieron todos los productores del mundo. Las reexportaciones de café por parte de países importadores generaron más del doble de lo que recibieron los productores. Y un ejemplo muy interesante, cuando vamos a tomar una taza de café a un coffee shop, con facilidad dejamos un quarter. Eso representa de repente más de 10 veces de lo que el productor está recibiendo por el café que dio lugar a esa taza. En ese sentido, llamó la atención que hoy nuestros amigos de Guatemala dejaron en cada uno de sus lugares una tarjetita que ilustre ese ejemplo. Apenas 2 centavos de esa taza, del valor de esa taza de café que nos tomamos, está siendo recibida por el productor de café. ¿Qué impacto ha tenido esta crisis en nuestros productores? Un impacto muy grande, totalmente deteriorada la economía. La migración se ha incrementado, no es de extrañar que la mayoría de estos migrantes vienen de los países centroamericanos. 50% de la población en Centroamérica está sumamente empobrecida y el 60 al 70% no consiguen suplir ni siquiera las necesidades de alimentación. ¿Qué impacto puede tener esto para la industria? Y aquí queremos llamar la atención de la industria. Podemos esperar falta de abastecimiento de café. Tenemos ejemplos de países que ya su capacidad de procesamiento está muy baja. El Salvador con un 30%, Costa Rica con un 50% de utilización de su capacidad de procesamiento y hay proyecciones ya de una disminución de la cosecha en Honduras. Todo esto está generando un mal manejo en la finca. Eso representa al final una pérdida en la calidad. Y un tema que quiero llamar la atención y que esperamos que puede ocurrir y que es una preocupación para la industria es cuál va a ser el comportamiento del consumidor final una vez que se entere, si tan solo supiera cómo se está produciendo y cómo se está manejando el café. Sentimos que el productor puede llegar a rechazar este producto al enterarse de la forma en que se está tratando al productor de café que da lugar a esa taza que consume. Me quedo por ahí, Chad. Gracias.
Bueno, gracias, René. Una consultita para usted. Usted mencionó cuando estábamos preparando para este panel que ustedes han pensado en cómo puede llegar a los consumidores este tipo de información, los datos. ¿Qué han pensado en este tema? ¿Por qué todavía no ha llegado esta información a los consumidores, por ejemplo?
Chad, sentimos que cada vez más el consumidor está interesado en saber qué es lo que está tomando. Y también en este momento los productores estamos considerando hacérselo saber mejor al consumidor final. Esta información, la transparencia que se está dando ahora en los procesos de comercialización va a ser muy importante para un cambio de comportamiento. El consumidor final, al enterarse de dónde viene su producción y la forma en que se está negociando con los productores de café, puede tener una reacción importante y sentimos que la industria debe considerar ese elemento y que debe preocuparle para que no nos pase igual que ha pasado en otros sectores productivos donde ha habido un rechazo hacia ese producto.
Ok, listo. Gracias, René. Eso fue como nuestra base de información para nuestro panel. Now I'm going to switch to Herbert Peñalosa from 575 Cafe, and his business model is a different business model that I think is refreshing in the sense that it is producer-driven and taking and managing all of the different roles that typically different value chain actors are playing and doing it all internally. So, Herbert, tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, well, 575 is part of my farms and a local association we have, and we're part of this bigger collective, which is, in little words, an agreement built on these agreements. These agreements with who? With the people that's been not representing our coffees right, or we don't feel that they're representing them right. It's probably not just about price, but about the type of conversations that these people were having with our final clients, with roasters and with consumers. So a little bit of what we build, and it sounds kind of obvious when you see in the diagram, but we just took everything to those one-on-one conversations. So everything from production, harvesting, I divide in both because, well, there's a thing about this model is that it just works for us right now in Colombia due to the thing that there's a lot of micro mills still on each farm. So we process, we benefit or process or post-harvest much of our coffees. All the QA, the dry milling, and the exporting. So we take all of that into the collective. Us, like producers that were part of the collective, take charge of that. We go to the dry mill ourselves, we do the exporting logistics ourselves, and we deal with roasters one-on-one. We even have financing, we call it crowdfunding, but it's not really public, it's amongst people we know, which help us, and there are roasters in the US helping us importing the coffees. So you can call it like vertical integralization, yeah, but we don't see it that way. It's a little bit just us taking control of how we sell our coffees and how we move our coffees. There's a thing about the collective. The collective is called the Real Botanical Expedition. It's based on an old project in Colombia in 18th and 19th century. We don't consider ourselves a trading company. We're not an importer. We're not an exporter. We're not a centralized mill. We're not an NGO. I mean, we don't work on that. We, as I told you, we're an agreement, but an agreement on what? That's the main question. Is that we're an agreement on honesty and transparency. We're an agreement on truth, being good or being bad or being ugly. It's like we work with quality, and on any step, on any point of the collective, I'm going to show you in the next slide that, but on any point of the collective, we tell things how they are. So if the coffee is not good enough for export, we give a reason why. If my coffee is not good enough, the collective gives me a reason why. I need to find out what to do with it. It's not built on the probably one of the paradigms of coffee specialty as well. It's like it's not built on the excess of producers and what do you do to just skim that part, that top part, and take that and move it as a specialty and then leave the rest behind. Is that no, we need to figure out a way to move our coffees. We need to be responsible for what we produce, but at the same time, we need to figure out a way how to bring that responsibility we are having in our farms to the final consumer. So that's what I talk about when I talk about honesty and truth. It's just an agreement saying like I'm not going to cross you, you're not going to do the project of the collective any wrong, and we are all going to try our best. Our best from the production to post-harvesting to the dry mill itself, and we're looking at all those overlooked steps in the industry. Dry mill, for example, has been one of the biggest places we've learned a lot. And that has allowed us to just generate more income to the collective itself. So this is a little bit of how we see it. Basically, we think, and I think personally, that producers don't crave for price for the sake of it. Probably price is not the discussion on how I see it. It's more about assertiveness. It's more about thinking what I need to do from the moment I start growing coffee to the moment I sell it to do the best possible for my revenue, for my efforts. It's not just like I said, a price for the sake of it. But there's something we have to consider is that we probably have the least prepared people in our countries to do one of the most complex tasks, which is grow coffee. Like farming is not easy at all. It's not one of those things is probably way more complicated than all of you here today think. If you read about nutrition in plants, you have to read from thermodynamics to endobotanical issues, and that includes a lot. And trying to put that burden in a producer is just too much. So that's one other part, and that's the initial stage of the collective, is that we have to be responsible for production. We need to know how to process, and that brings another thing. Is like what is it to know how to process? So there's a couple leading farms within the collective. Mine is one of them, and there's 6 of us. We're not traditional coffee growers. We are city people. Honestly, we're not. We weren't born in the farm. Just one of us comes from a coffee growing family, and we're in a position in Colombian society in which we have 2 choices. We can keep increasing our status and our position, and just probably elevate it, or we can use that position as leverage to help our peers and our communities. And that's the 2 choices you can make. So we decided for the later one, and we moved those tools and the knowledge, and just to raise the bar, to teach that everyone within the collective, how to be better. And how do you guarantee that? Well, transferring knowledge. You gotta teach them all. There has to be no secrets. You gotta tell it all. There has to be no egos. It's all is one inside the collective. It's not just you giving the input, putting your brand in the thing. That's why we chose that brand. It's unregisterable. It's something that was done in Colombia many years ago. We can't put any copyright in that brand, and that makes a lot of sense in what we do. And that's basically the agreement. So that's what the collective do. I think you can see it on the slide. And that brings us to one of the case studies. Is that this is actually a coffee we sold through the collective to a client that's here today in the audience. Funny enough, it's just a washed from one of our leading farms. Is actually my business partner and the collective director. And she's been growing coffee. Well, her family has been growing coffee for more than 70 years. And they're still living on the money they made in the 70s and 80s, which is funny enough. But through the collective, through just increasing the quality a little bit and having a little bit more awareness on the dry mill and the final preparation, they made 179% more than they will make on the local market. It's not. I don't know if that number is good or bad, honestly. We just got their numbers on costs. So their profit is around 25 to 30%, counting everything that comes underneath. So a little bit of an explanation. All of our numbers come straight from what the client is willing to pay. We take away import and warehousing costs, sales or marketing, shipment, what we pay for taxes to the FNC, operational within the project, like local warehousing, QA at the offices. So my company provides that service of the operational part of it. Some of it is done by some of the producers themselves within the collective. There was another slide that explained that how everyone can earn some more money within the chain. Then we add local shipping within Colombia, farm level assistance that it depends on each region, and the financing that is provided by the third parties I told you about. The local liaison is not there because, well, it's her farm, so she absorbs that cost of coffee gathering and sending it to the warehouse. And the last part, it's just what she earns, well, what they earn from financing, from the percentage of the total revenue of the volume. So each export is a volume that has its own numbers and its own revenue. And what do they earn for the exchange rate surplus? So what that last part means is basically that at the end of each export, we take all the revenue, we take everything that export made, and just distribute it once again. So in that sense, we can be probably we have no profit on that. We as a company and the collective itself. So that's basically a raw idea of how it works.
So you guys are taking a lot of these roles that are played by other value chain actors in more typical situations and doing it yourselves and realizing that there's a lot of efficiencies that you can gain that way and value that then stays with the producers and with the collective. And can I ask a question?
Yes.
So as we were preparing, we're talking about not every farmer is ready, suited, or interested in selling coffee and engaging with the market in this different way. In your collective, has it been hard to convince people that this extra effort and more attention to quality and processing, because it's more difficult every day to sell coffee and make a living as a producer because you have to have a certification and a process a different way and blah, blah, blah. How's that working?
Well, there's an undeniable truth that the world is changing for everyone, but in our case, it's coffee. Somebody, a couple talks ago, they were saying that a lot of coffee growers have been leaving coffee for the last 40 years. That means that they had a very good period on the 70s and 80s. Everyone within the producing side tends to think that the coffee is still the world of coffee is still the same. So you need little effort to sell coffee at a good price, and that's not going to happen anymore. So I'll give you an example. Ann is that. He's been around coffee for 60 years. He's a surgeon. He has superior education, a lot of things. He doesn't live off coffee. Their farm is subsidized by his work. And so he's in a different educational level than many producers. And he doesn't understand it. So it's like, well, you guys are too complicated. That's what he says. So it's like, you bring in a lot of complex things to coffee that weren't here 40 years ago. And the basic answer is like, man, this is not the same coffee as it was 40 years ago.
Different.
So either we change or we die. But the thing is that, it's resilience as everywhere. Like everyone is going to be resilient because nobody wants to give up to their position. But that's, I mean, you have to do it. Like
Great.
Somebody has to do it.
Well,
for all of us.
Speaking of changing and difficult, complicated conversations, I want to turn the conversation to Peter Dupont from Coffee Collective in Denmark and the work that they've done to really ensure that traceability and transparency and this notion of price and how farmers are remunerated has been embedded into their brand ethos. So, Peter?
Well, thank you. I chose to start with this slide because to me, as a coffee roaster with coffee shops, working with specialty coffee, with high quality coffee, it's worrying me that we see 5 primary countries that are producing really good coffee. You see the development since 1990 to 2016, how the total exports is falling. In the same time as we, from our end of the world, have seen the second and the third wave of specialty coffee rolling over. That clearly shows to me that there's a disconnection in the market. The market is not working. We value these coffees, but the producer stops producing it. So since we started the Coffee Collective in 2007, we have been working from the basic principle that we want to reach out to the consumers because we think they are a very important part of this market. And we want to work with transparency. We believe, I have that from my own experience as a barista when I started in 1998 as a barista, that the consumers, they do care about how the farmer is paid, or at least it's a positive preference for the consumers if they know the farmer has become better off. So that's something we try to work with from the beginning. How can we find a tangible element, transparent element that will show the way we work and how that is giving better conditions for the farmers? And looking at this picture is from the former one from one of our coffee shops. You can see consumers have many things on their agenda. They come into the shop, they want to get that good cup of coffee. They have a kid they need to talk to, or they have a friend they need to talk to, or whatever. They have very limited time in listening to us. So how is it possible for us to talk about financial transparency to the consumer at the same time? I've put up a few examples of what we have tried over the years. we've been making these kind of in-store posters to have it up as a conversation piece in our coffee shops, showing for 4 different producers we're working with what the market price was, the fair trade price at the time of our purchase, and the price that we paid to the farmer. That has been a good conversation piece, even though I must admit we didn't get as many reactions as we wanted directly from it. But there was a little bit of a misunderstanding with these graphs that some people, they thought that it was how much more expensive we were as a business. But anyway, then we had a piece to pick up on and make a conversation, and our baristas could engage in the talk. We just recently made this campaign running for 2 weeks, looking back at 2018, trying to present to the consumers, saying thank you for being part of this way of doing business, presenting exact numbers. You see the purple sticker that we put on our to-go cups. This is an example from the cooperative Kieni that we work with in Kenya. We put in nominal terms the quality bonus we have been able to pay to them in 2018 because they produce such a good coffee that our customers are willing to pay a good price for and enjoy. So that was an attempt to try and dive into that positive preference that we believe the consumers have for seeing the farmer better off. Also, just on the small chair there, there's this, I think it's called origami game or something, flip-flop, we call it in Danish, trying to have, that was lying around on the tables in the coffee shops where we had also this information lying there, but in a little more of a playful way, so engaging people in this way. It didn't have created a lot of conversations, but we got a lot of good feedback from the people who engaged with it. But next year we'll try to kind of turn up the volume a little bit because maybe we were a little bit too subtle in the conversations because it was actually very positive, the conversations we did have on the topic. Then just finally, since we started in 2007, you see our first bags up in the right corner there. We started working with transparency in the way that we use the term direct trade. And we put that on the back of coffee when we could guarantee that we had paid at least 25% above the market price to the producer and that we have visited the producer that year. But we wanted to have on the particular bag, because when the consumer buys a bag of coffee, they should have transparency of what they are buying, not just that they have a general story of how we do our business, but how is this particular coffee I'm buying, how is that bought? So that was how we started in 2007. In 2013, we had the white bag. We still do have that. But we put it, as you can see on the text, we put the exact FOB price we have paid on the bag, because at that time already direct trade was getting to be used for many different business models. So we wanted to be real transparent. So we put the actual FOB price on the label for the consumer to see. And since this is a rather technical number, the FOB price, we chose to also have this percentage above the market price that we have paid, to have that in the text there. That's something we have had good response on, and now we'll develop into the new label you see we'll be launching in a few months, where we'll focus on this percentage above the market price as a quality bonus, and try to communicate that more clearly.
So, thank you, Peter. I think it's great to see, both hearing from Herbert and Peter that there are different ways to engage with this traditional thing, this coffee value chain, in ways that are innovative and pushing toward more and more information, value capture, and transparency. Peter, just quickly before we move on to Michelle, how is the team engaged with this information? Because in my personal experience, sometimes it's hard to get people to want to talk about this because it's hard to interrupt a consumer's day and all of that. How does that work in your store?
I think that the way we generally think of it is that the consumers should be able to go into our coffee shops and just get that good cup of coffee that they are primarily there for. But we also want to have these different kind of transparent information there where we can engage in conversations when people are ready to do it. And I think that's a little bit the challenge, because on a daily basis we don't get as many conversations about these things as what we really would hope to. But we still see the effect of it, because we have building slowly the brand of being the transparent coffee company in Denmark. We have researchers wanting to study what we do, our business model. We have a lot of students who wants to do their master thesis about how we do and so on.
Even the Department of Labor wants your coffee or something, right?
Yeah, we had
Say that?
the Danish Institute of Human Rights. They want our coffee, and that's something that I'm very proud of. That it shows that we are reaching out to people who cares about these issues, and I think that's fundamental for us, because in the last end, we're working with quality coffee, and a precondition for quality coffee is financial sustainability for the farmer. So we need to help that process happening.
Great, great. So we heard from René about data that PROMOCAFE has about the countries it represents. We heard from Herbert about an innovative and value chain sort of revision, and we've heard from Peter. Michelle Bhattacharyya works for her own consultancy called On Up, but she has experience working with the World Banana Forum. And since we've heard from the attorneys about the dangers and the illegality of discussing price and collusion and price fixing and anything that would result in negative pricing impacts on consumers, I thought it would be important to hear about the World Banana Forum experience and how they got to a place where, as a sector, it felt safer to have these conversations.
Yep, absolutely. So, just to give you a little sense of the engagement with the World Banana Forum and why that's important for coffee is because it gives us another industry to talk about, to go through exactly what they've dealt with, feel a little bit safer in that conversation, and understand how we can get to a point where we're actually talking about the price that is necessary to cover sustainable cost of production, because really that's what we're all getting down to. So what they've done, or what I've been doing with them for several years, is working on deciding on one issue that can take this conversation forward. And the one issue that we've been working on is living wages. Living wages are a strong issue because they cover so many of the issues that are faced throughout the supply chain when you're looking at producers and making sure you're going to have workers having a decent living, making sure that you understand that the economic sustainability exists because there's enough there to achieve a decent standard of living. It creates a more secure market over a long time. And really what you're seeing in this slide is that definition of a living wage and what goes into a living wage calculation. It's a very basic thing. It's a cost of food at a basic nutritious diet. It's a cost of housing at a basic level of decency, meaning it's safe and it's healthy. We're not talking about living in a mansion, and I'll show you a picture later of what that actually looks like. It's a cost of other essential needs like clothing and personal care and the health care and education. And it's the cost of a small margin for unforeseen events. In order, if one thing happens, is that going to drive you into deep poverty? You want to be able to avoid that and be able to absorb some little shocks. So we find that in banana, and the reason I put this out as an example is because we started saying we should have a living wage. And I used to manage the work of the Global Living Wage Coalition, which is made up of standard systems like Fair Trade International, Rainforest Alliance, UTS, now Rainforest Alliance, and several others, right? And really they have already put into their standards this sort of methodology, which is the anchor methodology of calculating a living wage in producing countries. And they've said, okay, we should work towards payment of a living wage, right? And so I went to the banana producers and I said, look, we should be paying a living wage. And everyone threw up their hands and said, the gap is here. Our profit margin is here. How is that physically possible? How is it even... They're literally the gap from what is currently being paid to workers to what would be needed for a living wage would eat every bit of profit that a producer is having, plus money that doesn't even exist. And so that sort of began a conversation that goes back to what happened this morning, which is saying, okay, we need a supply chain where all the links are strong, right? And that means you can't go to producers and say, pay a living wage to your workers, and we're going to force you to do that when the capability isn't there. That means engaging the entirety of the supply chain. So what the World Banana Forum did was start looking at living wages and a way to engage from retailers and buyers down to producers and everyone that is involved in the value chain and say, let's just talk about this issue. They put together a working group that's a fair distribution of value, value and talked about that. And that working group, once we started to look at studies and data about the gaps in that industry from current wages to a living wage, that working group realized that we have to talk about price. At the end of the day, there's not enough money. We have to talk about price. How can we do that? How can we do that safely? The way that they do that is they started a subgroup on sustainable cost of production. It's not a pricing subgroup. It is a cost of production subgroup, and said we are all publicly going to make a statement to commit, and this is including multiple value chain actors, not just one group, so publicly make a statement to commit to moving towards a living wage. And to do that, we have to figure out what is the current distribution of value and who should take what proportion to cover a move towards a living wage if we understand a general gap. So we never are talking about setting a price. We are simply looking at the reality of here's the gap to a living wage, here's the proportional distribution of value throughout the value chain. And so really this is the role that each party has to play throughout. So I think that creates a model. That is an important one that coffee can also use. It's also being used in tea, and it's moving forward in other industries. But it's really exciting to see those conversations are moving forward in banana, and they're getting somewhere, and they're engaging more people. And putting out a public statement meant that more and more and more of the industry had to sign on. They got the sense that leadership, right, that there was a move to follow. And I think there's an opportunity, too, with specialty coffee to be that leadership that the rest of coffee can start to follow, right? That starts to say, we have to be a part of this as well. And it is simply living wage is a very good issue to focus on because it's clear, the amount. You can move on beyond that to the next category. So I just wanted to reference the Global Living Wage Coalition that I mentioned before. They've been doing living wage studies around the world, and I highlighted some of those that covered coffee-producing areas so that you get a good sense that you could actually measure the gap now. You don't have to do all the research from scratch. Some of it exists. You can look at what is the difference between what wages are happening and what wages we have to get to make this really economically sustainable. And then we have real figures to talk about where we can say, okay, what is everybody's role in getting to that goal?
Great, thank you. So, Michelle, you said a couple times during your slides here that one of the things that we need to see is broader sector participation in these dialogues to really try and tackle some of these challenges. Mm-hmm. How much did consumers factor into that conversation? Because, I mean, we have PROMOCAFE saying consumers may need to hear and understand a little bit more about the realities behind their cup of coffee. We have Peter engaging consumers. I know that's a part of the value proposition for you, Herbert. How much did consumers have to get into the conversation?
So, I think in the case of the World Banana Forum, it is not, there are a number of groups that are engaging with consumers, but it is not as much that they were a huge part of the conversation from that case. What I would say, though, is one of the values of using living wage as an issue to put this conversation is that some of what you said earlier, that consumers are confused. Oh, you're just more expensive than everyone else. There's a communication issue. Yet when you talk about, no, we want to make sure everyone earns a living wage, this is a hot topic around the world in every country, right? I'm right now working on a US-based living wage certification to say, can we make sure that all workers that are here are earning a living wage? Because they're not, right? People are getting the sense of what a living wage means. So focusing on, we are trying to make sure that all the coffee we purchase or all the coffee that we are contributing to is ensuring that a living wage can be earned by all workers. That is a huge tool for communicating to consumers, and I think it's not being used enough.
Great, great. Well, I see this timer clicking down and a red light flashing, and so while I think that we could all talk for a long time about our different approaches and ideas and experiences, I really I like the innovations that you all are representing. And I'll just say I have one more slide. Can I have it back? Can I have it back? Or is it gone? Because it was a picture of Michelle's that exemplified what a decent living condition was. And there you go.
Yeah.
It's not fancy. It is a dignified, decent, I mean, speak to it if you
yeah,
like.
I mean, this is, we did a living wage study in Nicaragua, and this was one of the photos of someone, she was the wealthiest person in her community. And this kitchen was one of the few that we could find in the community that met the standard of acceptable under a decent standard. Almost everyone else didn't. So they were all below this standard. So when you think about this, this is the reality. And this is not sustainable, right? This is, all we're trying to do is get people, when we talk about living wage, up to this level. That's it. Basic decency. So, I think sometimes people put in their head that you're trying to make everyone rich. No. We're trying to get everyone up to just basic decency, being able to have the right tools.
Great. Well, again, thank you so much. And I really appreciate, René, you sharing this information, and may you share more and more loudly and stronger, and may consumers get to understand it. And Herbert and Peter for your leadership and innovation, and Michelle for telling us a good example to not be so scared.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.